On a visit to a friend in Hashimara, Asamanja Babu was able to fulfill one of his long-cherished desires. Asamanja Babu lived in a small flat on Mohini Mohan Road in Bhawanipur. A clerk in the registry department of Lajpat Rai Post Office. Asamanja Babu was fortunate as he could walk to his office in 7 minutes flat without having to fight his way into the buses and trains of Calcutta. He lived a rather carefree life as he was not the kind of person to sit and brood about what might have been had fate been kinder to him. On the whole, he was quite content with his lot. 2 Hindi films and a dozen packets of cigarette a month, a fish twice a week, these were enough to keep him happy. The only thing that perturbed him at times was his lack of companionship, a bachelor with few friends and relatives. He often wished he had a dog to keep his company. It need not be a huge Alsatian like the one owned by the Talukdars, who lived 2 houses down the lane. It could be any ordinary little dog, which would follow him around morning and evening, wag its tail when he came home from work, and obey his orders with alacrity. Asamanja Babu's secret desires were that he would speak to his dog in English. Stand up, sit down, shake hands. How nice it would be if his dog obeyed such commands. Asamanja Babu liked to believe that dogs belonged to the English race. Yes, an English dog. And he would be its master. That would make him really happy. On a cloudy day, marked by a steady drizzle, Asamanja Babu went to the market in Hashimara to buy some oranges. At one end of the market, besides a stunted cool tree, sat a Bhutanese, holding a cigarette between his thumb and forefinger. As their eyes met, the man smiled. Was he a beggar? His clothes made him look like one. Asamanja Babu noticed at least 5 sewn-on patches on his trousers and jacket. But the man didn't have a begging bowl. Instead, by his side was a shoebox with a little pup sticking its head out of it. "Good morning," said the man in English. His eyes reduced to slits as he smiled. Asamanja Babu was obliged to return the greeting. "Buy dog? Dog buy? Very good dog." The man had taken the pup out of the box and had put it down on the ground. "Very cheap, very good. Happy dog." The pup shook the raindrops off his coat, looked at Asamanja Babu, and wagged its minuscule 2-inch tail. Asamanja Babu moved closer to the pup, crouched on the ground, and stretched out his hand. The pup gave his ring finger a lick with its pink tongue. "Nice friendly dog." How much? What price?" 10 rupees. A little haggling and the price came down to 750. Asamanja Babu paid the money, put the pup back in the shoebox, closed the lid to save it from the drizzle, and turned homewards, forgetting all about the oranges. Biren Babu, who worked in the Hashimara State Bank, had no idea about his friend's wish to own a dog. He was naturally surprised and a bit alarmed to see what the shoebox contained. But when he heard the price, he heaved a sigh of relief. "Phew," he said in a tone of mild reprimand. "Why come all the way to Hashimara to buy a mongrel? You could easily have bought one in Bhawanipur." That was not true. Asamanja Babu knew it. He had often seen mongrel pups in the streets in his neighborhood. None of them had ever wagged his tail at him or licked his finger. Whatever Biren might say, the dog was something special. But the fact that the pup was a mongrel was something of a disappointment to Asamanja Babu too. And he said so. Biren Babu's retort came sharp and quick. "But do you know what it means to keep a pedigree dog as a pet? The vet's fees alone would cost you half a month's salary. With this dog, you have no worries. You don't even need to give it a special diet. He'll eat what you eat. But don't give him fish, okay? Fish is for cats. Dogs have trouble with fish bones. Back in Calcutta, it occurred to Asamanja Babu that he had to think the name for the pup. He wanted to give it an English name, but the only one he could think of was Tom. Then, looking at the pup one day, it struck him that since it was brown in color, Brownie would be a good name for it. A cousin of his had a camera of an English make called Brownie, so the name must be an English one. The moment he decided on the name and tried it on the pup of a weaker stool and padded up to him wagging its tail, Asamanja Babu said, "Sit down." And immediately the dog sat on its hunches and opened its mouth in a tiny yawn. Asamanja Babu had a fleeting vision of Brownie winning the first prize for cleverness in a dog show. It was lucky that his servant Bipin had also taken a fancy to the dog. While Asamanja Babu was away at work, Bipin gladly took it upon himself to look after Brownie. Asamanja Babu had warned Bipin against feeding the dog rubbish and see that he doesn't go out into the street. Car drivers these days seem to wear blinkers, but however much he might instruct his servant, his worry would linger until he returned from work. And Brownie greeted him ecstatically, his tail wagging fast. The incident took place 3 months after returning from Hashimara. It was a Saturday, and the date was November 23rd. Asamanja Babu had just got back from work and sat down on the old wooden chair, the only piece of furniture in the room apart from the bed and the wicker stool, when it suddenly collapsed under him and sent him sprawling on the floor. Naturally, he was hurt and in fact was wondering if, like the rickety leg of the chair, his right elbow was also out of commission, when an unexpected sound made him forget all about his pain. It had come from the bed. It was the sound of laughter, or more accurately, a giggle, the source of which was undoubtedly Brownie, who sat on the bed, his lips still curled up. If Asamanja Babu's general knowledge had been wider, he would surely have known that dogs never laughed. And if he had any modicum of imagination, the incident would have robbed him of his sleep. In the absence of either, what Asamanja Babu did was to sit down with a book all about dogs, which he had bought for 2 rupees from a second-hand bookshop in Free School Street. He searched for an hour, but found no mention in the book of laughing dogs. And yet, there wasn't the slightest doubt that Brownie had laughed. Not only that, he had laughed because there had been cause for laughter. Asamanja Babu could clearly recall a similar incident from his own childhood. A doctor had come on a visit to their house in Chandanagar and had sat on a chair which had collapsed under him. Asamanja Babu had burst out in a fit of laughter and as a result had his ears twisted by his father. He shut the book and looked at Brownie. As their eyes met, Brownie put his front paws on the pillow and wagged his tail, which had grown 1.5 inches longer in 3 months. There was no trace of a smile on his face now. Why would there be? To laugh without a reason was a sign of madness. Asamanja Babu felt relieved that Brownie was not a mad dog. On 2 more occasions within a week of this incident, Brownie had reason to laugh. The first took place at night, at around 9:30. Asamanja Babu had just spread a white sheet on the floor for Brownie to sleep, on when a cockroach came fluttering into the room and settled on the wall. Asamanja Babu picked up a slipper and flung it at the insect. The slipper missed its target, landed on the mirror hanging on the wall, and sent it crashing to the floor. This time, Brownie's laughter more than compensated for the loss of his mirror. The second time, it was not laughter, but a brief snicker. Asamanja Babu was puzzled. Nothing had happened, so Why the snicker? His servant Bipin provided the answer when he came into the room. He glanced at his master and said, smiling, "There's shaving soap right by your ear." With his mirror broken, Asamanja Babu had to use one of the window panes for shaving. He now felt with his fingers and found that Bipin was right. That Brownie should laugh even when the reason was so trifling surprised Asamanja Babu a great deal. Sitting at his desk in the post office, he found his thoughts turning again and again to the smile on Brownie's face and the sound of the snicker. All about dogs may say nothing about a dog's laughter, but if he could get a hold of something like an encyclopedia of dogs, there was sure to be a mention of laughter in it. When 4 bookshops in Bhawanipur and all the ones in Newmarket failed to produce such an encyclopedia, Asamanja Babu wondered whether he should call on Mr. Rajani Chatterjee. The retired professor lived not far from his house on the same street. Asamanja Babu didn't know what subject Rajani Babu had taught, but he had seen through the window of his house many fat books in a bookcase in what appeared to be a professor's study. So, on a Sunday morning, Asamanja Babu offered up a silent prayer to Goddess Durga for help in his adventure and made his way to Professor Chatterjee's house. He had seen him several times from a distance and had no idea he had such thick eyebrows and a voice so grating. But since the professor didn't turn him away from the door, Asamanja Babu took courage and sat himself down on a sofa opposite the professor. Then he gave a short cough and waited. Professor Chatterjee put aside the newspaper he was reading and turned his attention to the visitor. "Your face seems familiar." "I live close by." "Oh, I see. Well, I have seen a dog in your house. That is why." "So what? We have 2 dogs, not 1. I see. I have 1 too." "Are you employed to count the number of dogs in the city?" Asamanja Babu missed the sarcasm in the question. He said, "I've come to ask if you have something I've been looking for." "What is it?" I wonder if you have a dog encyclopedia." "No, I don't." "Why do you need one?" "You see, my dog laughs, so I wanted to find out if it was natural for dogs to laugh." Do your dogs laugh?" Throughout the time it took, the wall clock in the room took the strike 8. Professor Chatterjee looked steadily at Asamanja Babu. Then he asked, "Does your dog laugh at night?" "Well, yes, even at 9. And what are your preferences in drugs?" "Only ganja can produce such symptoms." Perhaps you take charas and hashish as well." Asamanja Babu meekly answered that his only vice was smoking, and even that he had to reduce from 3 packets a week to 2 ever since the arrival of his dog. "And yet you say your dog laughs." "I've seen and heard him laugh with my own eyes and ears." Listen, Professor Chatterjee took off his spectacles, cleaned them with his handkerchief, put them on against, and fixed Asamanja Babu with a hard stare. Then he declaimed in the tones of a classroom lecture, "I am amazed at your ignorance concerning a fundamental fact of nature. Of all the creatures created by God, only the human species is capable of laughter. This is one of the prime differences between Homo sapiens and other creatures. Don't ask me why it should be so, because I don't know. I've heard that a marine species called the dolphin has a sense of humor. Dolphins may be the single exception. Apart from them, there are none. It is not clearly understood why human beings should laugh. Great philosophers have racked their brains to find out why, but have not succeeded. Do you understand?" Asamanja Babu understood. He also understood that it was time for him to take his leave because the professor had once again picked up his newspaper and disappeared behind it. Dr. Sukhomai Bhomik, some called him Dr. Bhomik, was a well-known vet, hoping that a vet might listen to him even if other people didn't. Asamanja Babu made an appointment on the phone and took Brownie on the vet's residence on Gokhale Road. Brownie had laughed 17 times in the last 4 months. One thing Asamanja Babu had noticed was that Brownie didn't laugh at funny remarks, only at funny incidents. Asamanja Babu had recited the nonsense rhyme King of Bombardier to Brownie, and it had produced no effect on him. And yet, when a potato from the curry slipped from Asamanja Babu's finger and landed in a plate of curd, Brownie had almost choked with laughter. Professor Chatterjee had lectured him about God's creature, but here was living proof that the learned gentleman was wrong. So Asamanja Babu went to the vet. Though he knew that he would be charged 20 rupees for the visit, but even before the vet heard the dog's unique trait, his eyebrows had shot up at the dog's appearance. I have seen mongrels, but never one like this. He lifted the dog and placed him on the table. Brownie sniffed at the brass paperweight at his feet. What do you feed him? He eats what I eat, sir. He has no pedigree, you see. Dr. Bhomik frowned. He was observing the dog with great interest. We can tell a pedigree dog when we see one, but sometimes we are not so sure. This one, for instance, I would hesitate to call him a mongrel. I suggest that you stop feeding him rice and dal. I'll make a diet chart for him. Asamanja Babu now made an attempt to come out with the real reason for his visit. My dog has a speciality, which is why I have brought him to you. Speciality? The dog laughs. Laughs? Yes, laughs, like you and me? You don't say. Well, can you make him laugh now, so I can see? Now Asamanja Babu was stumped. By nature a shy person, he was quite unable to make faces at Brownie to make him laugh. Nor was it likely that something funny should happen here at this very moment. So he had to tell the doctor that Brownie didn't laugh when asked to, but only when he saw something funny happening. After this, Dr. Bhomik didn't have much time left for Asamanja Babu. He said, "Your dog looks distinctive enough. Don't try to make him more so by claiming that he laughs. I can tell you from my 22 years experience that dogs cry, dogs feel afraid, dogs show anger also, hatred, disrupt and jealousy. Dogs even dream, but dogs don't laugh." After this encounter, Asamanja Babu decided that he would never tell anyone about Brownie's laughter again. Why court embarrassment when he could not prove his story? What did it matter if others never knew? He himself knew. Brownie was his dog, his own property. Why drag outsiders into their private world? But things don't always go according to plan. One day, Brownie's laughter was revealed to an outsider. For some time, Asamanja Babu had developed the habit of taking Brownie for a walk in the afternoon near the Victoria Memorial. One April day, in the middle of their work, a big storm came up suddenly. Asamanja Babu glanced at the sky and decided that it wasn't safe to try to get back home, as the rain would start pelting down any moment. So he ran with Brownie and took shelter below the marble arch with the black equestrian statue on it. Meanwhile, huge drops of rain had started to fall and people were looking for shelter. A stout man in a white bush shirt and trousers, 20 paces away from the arch, opened his umbrella and held it over his head when a sudden strong gust of wind turned the umbrella inside out with a loud snap. To tell the truth, Asamanja Babu himself was about to burst out laughing, but Brownie beat him to it with a loud canine guffaw, the sound of which rose above the cacophony of the storm and reached the ears of the helpless gentleman. The man stopped trying to bring the umbrella back to its original shape and stared at Brownie in utter amazement. Brownie was now quite helpless with laughter. Asamanja Babu had tried frantically to suppress it by clapping his hand over the dog's mouth, but had given up. The dumbfounded gentleman walked to Asamanja Babu as if he had seen a ghost. Brownie's paroxysm was now subsiding, but it was still enough to make the gentleman's eyes pop out of his head. "A laughing dog!" "Yes, a laughing dog," said Asamanja Babu. "But how extraordinary!" Asamanja Babu could make out that the man was not a Bengali. Perhaps he was a Gujarati or a Parsi. Asamanja Babu braced himself to answer in English the questions he knew he would soon be bombarded with. The rain had turned into a heavy shower. The gentleman took shelter alongside Asamanja Babu, and in 10 minutes had found out all there was to know about Brownie. He also took down Asamanja Babu's address. He said his name was Pilu Pochkanwala, and he knew a lot about dogs and wrote about them occasionally, and that his experience today had surpassed anything that had ever happened to him or was likely to happen in future. He felt something had to be done about it, since Asamanja Babu himself was obviously unaware of what a priceless treasure he owned. It wouldn't be wrong to say that Brownie was responsible for Mr. Pochkanwala being knocked down by a minibus while crossing Chorungi Road soon after the rain had stopped. It was the thought of Laughing Dog running through his head which made him a little unmindful of the traffic. After spending 2.5 months in hospital, Pochkanwala went off to Nainital to recuperate. He came back to Calcutta after a month in the hills, and the same evening he made his way to the Bengal Club and described the incident of the Laughing Dog to his friends. Mr. Balapuria and Mr. Bishash, within half an hour the story had reached the ears of 27 other members and 3 bearers of the club. By next morning, the incident was known to at least 1,000 of citizens of Calcutta. Brownie hadn't laughed once during these 3.5 months. One good reason was that he had seen no funny incidents. Asamanja Babu didn't see it as cause for alarm. It had never crossed his mind to cash in on Brownie's unique gift. He was happy with the way Brownie had filled a yawning gap in his life and felt more drawn to him than he had to any human being. Among those who got the news of the Laughing Dog was an executive in the office of the Statesman. He sent to the reporter Rajat Chaudhuri and suggested that he should interview the owner of this Laughing Dog. Asamanja Babu was gratefully surprised that a reporter should think of calling on him. It was when Rajat Chaudhuri mentioned Pochkanwala that the reason for the visit became clear. He asked the reporter into his bedroom. The wooden chair had been fitted with a new leg, and Asamanja Babu offered it to the reporter while he himself sat on the bed. Brownie had been observing a line of ants crawling up the wall. He now jumped up on the bed and sat beside Asamanja Babu. Rajat Chaudhuri was about to press the recording switch on his tape recorder when it suddenly occurred to Asamanja Babu that a word of warning was needed. By the way, sir, my dog used to laugh quite frequently, but in the last few months, he hasn't laughed at all, so you may be disappointed if you are expecting to see him laugh. Like many a young energetic reporter, Rajat Chaudhuri exuded a cheerful confidence in the presence of a good story. Although he was slightly disappointed, he was careful not to show it. He said, "That's all right. I just want to get some details from you. To start with, his name. What do you call your dog?" Asamanja Babu bent down to speak closer to the mic. Brownie. Brownie. The watchful eyes of the reporter had noted that the dog had wagged his tail at the mention of his name. How old is he? 13 months. When did you find the dog? This had happened before. Rajat Chaudhury's greatest handicap often showed itself in the middle of interviews, causing him no end of embarrassment. Here too, the same thing might have happened had it not unexpectedly helped in drawing out Brownie's special characteristic. Thus, Rajat Chaudhury was the second outsider after Poch Kanwala to see with his own eyes a dog laughing like a human being. The morning of the following Sunday, sitting in his air-conditioned room in the Grand Hotel, Mr. William P. Moody of Cincinnati, USA, read in the papers about the laughing dog and at once asked the hotel operator to put him through to Mr. Nondi of the Indian Tourist Bureau. That Mr. Nondi knew his way about the city had been made abundantly clear in the last couple of days when Mr. Moody had occasion to use his service. The statesman had printed the name and address of the owner of the laughing dog, and Mr. Moody was very anxious to meet this character. Asamanja Babu didn't read the statesman. Besides, Rajat Chaudhury hadn't told him when the interview would appear in print, or he might have brought a copy. It was in the fish market that his neighbor Kali Krishna Dotto told him about it. "You're a fine man," said Mr. Dotto. "You have been guarding such a treasure in your house for over a year, and you haven't breathed a word to anybody about it. I must drop in at your place sometime this evening and say hello to your dog." Asamanja Babu's heart sank. He could see there was a trouble ahead. There were many more like Mr. Dotto in and around his neighborhood who read the statesman and who would want to drop in and say hello to his dog. It was a most unnerving prospect. Asamanja Babu quickly made up his mind. He would spend the day away from home. So with Brownie under his arm, for the first time in his life he called a taxi and headed to the Baligan station, where he boarded a train to Port Canning. Halfway there, the train pulled up at a station called Palsip. Asamanja Babu liked the look of this place and got off. He spent the whole day roaming in the quiet bamboo groves and mango orchards and felt greatly refreshed. Brownie too seemed to enjoy himself. The gentle smile that played around his lips was something Asamanja Babu had never noticed before. This was a benign smile, a smile of peace and contentment, a smile of inner happiness. He had read somewhere that a year in the life of a dog equaled 7 years in the life of a human being, and yet he could scarcely imagine such tranquil behavior in such surroundings from a 7-year-old human child. It was past 7 in the evening when Asamanja Babu got back home. He asked Bipin if anyone called him. So when Bipin said he had to open the door to callers at least 40 times, Asamanja Babu obviously could not help congratulating himself on his foresight. He has just taken off his shoes and asked Bipin for a cup of tea when there was another knock on the front door. "Oh hell," swore Asamanja Babu. He went to the door and opened it and found himself staring at a foreigner. "Wrong number," he was at the point of saying when he caught sight of a young Bengali man standing behind the foreigner. Whom do you want?" "You," said Shamul Nondi of the Indian Tourist Bureau. "That is not to say if the dog standing behind you is yours. He certainly looks like one described in the papers today. May we come in?" Asamanja Babu was obliged to ask them into his bedroom. The foreigner sat on the chair, Mr. Nondi on the wicker stool, and Asamanja Babu on his bed. Brownie, who seemed a bit ill at ease, chose to stay outside the threshold, probably because he had never seen two strangers in the room before. Brownie. The foreigner leaned towards the dog and called him repeatedly. Brownie, with his eye fixed on the stranger, was unmoved. Who were these people? Asamanja Babu was wondering to himself when Mr. Nondi provided the answer. The foreigner was a wealthy and distinguished citizen of United States, whose main purpose in coming to India was to look for old Rolls-Royce cars. The American had now got off the chair and sitting on his haunches, was making faces at the dog. After 3 minutes of abortive clowning, the man gave up, turned to Asamanja Babu and asked, "Is he sick?" Asamanja Babu shook his head. "Does he really laugh?" asked the American. In case Asamanja Babu was unable to follow the American speech, Mr. Nundi translated in for him. "Brownie laughs," said Asamanja Babu, but only when he feels amused. A tinge of red spread over the American's face when Nundi translated Asamanja Babu's answer to him. In no uncertain terms, he let it be known that he wasn't willing to squander any money on the dog unless he had proof that it really laughed. He refused to be saddled with something which might later prove useless. He further let it be known that in his house he had precious objects from China to Peru, and that he had a parrot which spoke only Latin. I brought my checkbook with me to pay for the laughing dog, but only if I have proof that it actually does so. He then proceeded to pull out a blue checkbook from his pocket to prove his statement. Asamanja Babu glanced at it out of the corner of his eyes. Citibank of New York, it said on the cover. "You would be walking on air," said Mr. Nundi temptingly. "If you know a way to make the dog laugh, then out with it. This gentleman is ready to pay up to $20,000. That's 2 lakhs of rupees. The Bible says that God created the universe in 6 days. A human being with his imagination can do the same thing in 6 seconds. An image floated into Asamanja Babu's mind at Mr. Nundi's word. It was of himself in a spacious, air-conditioned office, sitting in a swivel chair with his legs up on the table, the heady smell of Hashnu Hana wafting in through the window. But the image vanished like a picked balloon at a sudden sound. Brownie was laughing. He had never laughed like this before, but he's laughing. Mr. Moody was down on his knees, tense with excitement, watching the extraordinary spectacle. The checkbook came out again, and along with that, his gold Parker pen. Brownie was still laughing. Asamanja Babu was puzzled because he couldn't make out the reason of the laughter. Nobody had stammered. Nobody had stumbled. Nobody's umbrella had turned inside out, and no mirror on the wall had been hit with a slipper. Why then was Brownie laughing? "You are very lucky," commented Mr. Nundi. "I think I ought to get a percentage of the sale. Wouldn't you say so?" Mr. Moody rose from the floor and sat down on the chair. He said, "Ask him how he spells his name." Although Mr. Nundi relayed the question in Bengali, Asamanja Babu didn't answer because he had just seen the light, and the light filled his heart with a great sense of wonder. Instead of spelling his name, he said, "Please tell the foreign gentleman that if he only knew why the dog was laughing, he wouldn't have opened his checkbook." "Why don't you tell me?" Mr. Nundi snapped in a dry voice. He certainly didn't like the way events were shaping up. If the mission failed, he knew the American's wrath would fall on him. Brownie had at last stopped laughing. Asamanja Babu lifted him up on his lap, wiped his tears and said, "My dog's laughing because the gentleman thinks money can buy everything." "I say," said Mr. Nundi. "So your dog's a philosopher, is he?" "Yes, sir." "That means you won't sell him, "No, sir." To Mr. Moody, Shamul Nundi only said that the owner had no intention of selling the dog. Mr. Moody put his checkbook in his pocket, slapped the dust off his knees, and on his way out of the room, said with a shake of his head, "The guy must be crazy." When the sound of the American's car had faded away, Asamanja Babu looked into Brownie's eyes and said, "I was right about why you laughed, wasn't I?" Brownie chuckled in assent. That in his house he had precious objects from China to Peru, and that he had a parrot which spoke only Latin. I brought my checkbook with me to pay for the laughing dog, but only if I have proof that it actually does so. He then proceeded to pull out a blue checkbook from his pocket to prove his statement. Asamanja Babu glanced at it out of the corner of his eyes. Citibank of New York, it said on the cover. You would be walking on air, said Mr. Nondi temptingly. If you know a way to make the dog laugh, then out with it. This gentleman is ready to pay up to $20,000. That's 2 lakhs of rupees. The Bible says that God created the universe in 6 days. A human being with his imagination can do the same thing in 6 seconds. An image floated into Asamanja Babu's mind at Mr. Nondi's word. It was of himself in a spacious, air-conditioned office, sitting in a swivel chair with his legs up on the table, the hairy smell of Hashnu Hana wafting in through the window. But the image vanished like a picked balloon at a sudden sound. Brownie was laughing. He had never laughed like this before, but he's laughing. Mr. Moody was down on his knees, tense with excitement, watching the extraordinary spectacle. The checkbook came out again, and along with that, his gold Parker pen. Brownie was still laughing. Asamanja Babu was puzzled because he couldn't make out the reason of the laughter. Nobody had stammered. Nobody had stumbled. Nobody's umbrella had turned inside out, and no mirror on the wall had been hit with a slipper. Why then was Brownie laughing? You are very lucky, commented Mr. Nondi. I think I ought to get a percentage of the sale. Wouldn't you say so? Mr. Moody rose from the floor and sat down on the chair. He said, ask him how he spells his name. Although Mr. Nondi relayed the question in Bengali, Asamanja Babu didn't answer because he had just seen the light, and the light filled his heart with a great sense of wonder. Instead of spelling his name, he said, please tell the foreign gentleman that if he only knew why the dog was laughing, he wouldn't have opened his checkbook. Why don't you tell me? Mr. Nondi snapped in a dry voice. He certainly didn't like the way events were shaping up. If the mission failed, he knew the American's wrath would fall on him. Brownie had at last stopped laughing. Asamanja Babu lifted him up on his lap, wiped his tears and said, my dog's laughing because the gentleman thinks money can buy everything. I say, said Mr. Nondi. So your dog's a philosopher, is he? Yes, sir. That means you won't sell him, No, sir. To Mr. Moody, Shamal Nondi only said that the owner had no intention of selling the dog. Mr. Moody put his checkbook in his pocket, slapped the dust off his knees, and on his way out of the room, said with a shake of his head, the guy must be crazy. When the sound of the American's car had faded away, Asamanja Babu looked into Brownie's eyes and said, I was right about why you laughed, wasn't I? Brownie chuckled innocent.